In the right to, I plan to object. I plan on taking some time to explain why I object. What is happening in the Senate is phenomenal. And I want the American people to see this. The federal government is 89% bigger than it was 10 years ago. And we just heard the majority leader say more than we were 10 years ago. But I want us to understand exactly what's going on. This has been made to have any flexibility in terms of how they spend their money. They've made no request for a reprogramming of funds within the FAA. They have over $500 million unobligated sitting in balances that aren't obligated. So none of this had to happen. This has been a created situation. I want you to think for a minute about the number of people who didn't make their aunt's funeral yesterday because of a contrived situation. The number of people who may not get to a birth of a grandchild. The number of business meetings that aren't going to occur because we've created a contrived situation. Our problem is we're continuing to inconvenience hundreds of American people on a political point because we can't cut any spending in Washington. Let me outline for my colleagues just a moment what the FAA could do. They could save $105 million just by cutting their overhead expenses for consultants, supplies, and travel by 15%. That's 1/7. That's 1/6 of all the money they need to keep all the controllers going. They can save $41 million by eliminating funding that the president's already recommended eliminating in terms of programs for airports that have on the National Plan of Integrated Airports. They've already recommended doing that, but they're not doing that. They have the flexibility to do that, but they're not doing it. That's another $41 million. They can save $6 million on the small community air service, flexible. They could reduce the airport improvement program. They have plenty of flexibility there. That's up to $926 million. They could do that. They could reduce or eliminate, and they would have to have our help to do this, the Essential Air Service Program, where at many airports across this country, we're paying $1,200 subsidy for people who are flying less than 10 people out of an airport a day, less than 90 miles away from a major airport. So to say that there's no flexibility, they don't want any flexibility. And the fact is our country's headed towards bankruptcy. Now let me talk about OCO for a minute. It's true, OCO money's in the budget because we thought we were going to have to spend it. But every penny of that money will be borrowed money. Borrowed money. And so if we weren't going to spend it, now to say, oh, well, we're going to go over here and take care of sequestration. A 4% cut in the federal budget. Only 89%. And we can't find 4% within the FAA? Let me outline a few other things that are going on at the FAA. They have posted requirements for non-essential employees since Sequester started. They've made no efforts at flexibility. They've made no efforts to do what they could do to keep the most number of controllers flying, working. This isn't going to happen. We're not going to borrow money anymore against the future of our kids when in fact we have other ways to do it. And I'll make my final point. The president's the CEO of this country. He can make this happen with the least amount of inconvenience for the American people. The question is, will he or not? Will he or not? Will we play this political shell game with the lives and perhaps the safety and certainly the inconvenience of the traveling public in this country to make a point that there's no way you can cut any spending out of the federal government when it's 89%, and by the way, it's 48% bigger under President Obama. So it's a real choice. Americans are going to get a real choice. Can we, in fact, respond in a prudent way to run this government in an efficient manner and eliminate low priority items and put money like NIH in a priority? We can. The question is do we have the will to do that? And what we're hearing from the majority leaders, No, we don't want to cut anything. We'll just take some funny money that doesn't really exist, and if we use it, we're going to borrow it. Hey, take all the pain away. There won't be any oversight. There won't be any streamlining. There won't be any priorities made in terms of how we spend money. Every American family has had to make those decisions, and we're refusing to do it. And when you ask the president, do you want the flexibility? He says no. Bill, if high priorities up here and low priorities down here, that doesn't make any sense. That tells me it's all political. Doesn't have anything to do with the FAA. Has to do with creating an event so that we won't do the best things in the best long-term interest of the country. So with that, I object, and I would ask for consent that the Senate proceed to calendar number 19S16, Inhofe-Toomey bill on flexibility with an amendment that current changes for sequestration, that the bill be read 3 times and passed as amended with no intervening action or debate.
Objection is heard to the primary request. Is there objection to the follow-up request?
Yes.
Objection is heard.
Madam President.
Mr. Leader.
Earlier this year, the Senate voted on dueling responses to the sequestration. Democrats had a balanced plan, half revenues, half spending. Republicans tried giving flexibility with, of course, no revenues whatsoever. The Senate voted both of these down. We know these plans won't work, so there is absolutely no need to repeat what has already failed. Let's try to solve the problem. Now, Madam President, I appreciate my friend from Oklahoma's mini lecture here, but it's wrong. Madam President, it's good to go back and talk about what's happened. When President Bush took office, and I know we hate to keep bringing that up, his library is going to be dedicated in a few days, he had a surplus over 10 years of $7 trillion. When he left office, he had a debt of almost $2 trillion. Why? Was it because government got bigger? Well, it got bigger because we had 2 wars paid for with the $7 trillion should have been surplus. It was all borrowed money, all borrowed money. The Clinton years, when Bush stepped into office, Clinton had created 22 million jobs in 8 years. During Bush 8 years, we lost 8 million jobs and lost our entire surplus. So, of course, those 2 wars and the tax cuts were unpaid for, really created some problems. Now, Madam President, the senator from Oklahoma complains about government is larger than it was 2 years ago. Well, I've talked about that. But Madam President, one thing my friend fails to acknowledge is Simpson-Bowles. By the way, he voted against that. But is that right? You were with Senator Durbin. You voted for it.
For it.
I appreciate that. Most of the Republicans that were on part of that voted against it. My liberal friend, Dick Durbin, voted for that. But Madam President, the reason I mention that, Simpson-Bowles, they wanted to arrive at savings of $4 trillion, as I understand it. We've already done $2.5 trillion. It's not as if we haven't done anything. And I would also talk about my friend from Oklahoma. I know that he's smart, and I understand that. But Madam President, just because you're smart doesn't mean you're always right. Madam President, we have a situation where this country has been driven by the Tea Party for the last number of years. When I was in school, I studied government, and I learned about the anarchists. Now, they were different than the Tea Party because they were violent, but they were anarchists because they did not believe in government at any level, and they acknowledged it. The Tea Party kind of hides that. They don't say we're against government, but that's what it all amounts to. They're not doing physically destructive things to buildings and people, but they are doing everything they can to throw a monkey wrench into any form of government, whether it's local, whether it's state or federal government. That's what it's all about. And so anything they can do to throw a monkey wrench in the wheels of government, they're happy doing that. And I'm sorry to say my friend from Oklahoma is helping them. Maybe not directly, but indirectly, and that's wrong. Government is not inherently bad. Government is inherently good. That's why we have a constitution, and that's what we direct the activities of this government based upon. So, Madam President, we have a situation here that is really not good. We have programs being cut all over America. Rather than doing it, as my friend from New York said, with some kind of a meat cleaver, we should be doing it with a scalpel, doing things that are fine-tuning and working to eliminate these programs. Now, my friend here, I knew I had some notes. My friend talks about, why doesn't the FAA cut other programs? Listen to this. He wants to cut airport improvement programs. These are job creating. They create jobs at airports, runways, terminals, doing things that create jobs. Essential air service may not mean much to him. We had a program where, I don't know if it was my friend from Oklahoma, some Republican senator offered an amendment to get rid of essential air service. One of the places they indicated it should be cut is Ely, Nevada. I said, okay, too much per passenger, I'll go along with that. I could have stopped that. I didn't do that. So we have had this debate previously. Essential air service has been whacked on a number of occasions. There are places in America where essential air service is just what it says. It's essential to give those rural communities the ability to have an airplane come in there once in a while. The Congressional Budget Office, and they would give us credit. It wouldn't be toward the deficit to do something for 5 months, take a little bit of money out of that overseas contingency fund. We're going to cut money from that. We're not going to spend all that money that has been set aside to take care of the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. So, Madam President, it is too bad we're right here with competing unanimous consent requests, and the American people are going to continue to suffer, whether it's some little kid that's not going to be able to go to a Head Start program, whether some senior citizen is going to miss his meal on wheels, or the other programs, in addition to the devastation that's going to take place to our airports. Sure.
Thank you. Senator, I really appreciate your taking the leadership here. And as I understand it, and I want you to confirm it, what you've done is you've suggested that the cuts that are hurting so many of our American citizens be restored, and you're paying for that. You're not putting it on the credit card. You're paying for it by taking funds from the overseas account because we're winding down the wars. Am I correct that what you're doing is paying a price that equals the amount that you're restoring of the sequester? Is that correct?
That is true.
Okay. And I also wanted to say to my friend, and I know others want to speak, so I won't be long here, but I will stay around and hopefully have a chance to expound on this. But from what I understand, we are really suffering in this country. I mean, I have examples of people who were turned away from cancer clinics. They can't get their chemotherapy. And the Cancer Society, which is not a government entity, has said this is very dangerous. Is my friend aware that patients are being turned away and not getting the chemotherapy? Grants are not being funded. I know he mentioned that, but I think the fact that patients who need chemotherapy to live, some of them are being denied this, is my friend aware of that?
In addition to that, I say to my friend from California, there are research programs dealing with dread diseases in addition to cancer, that research is being curtailed.
And I would also say, I wondered if my friend knew, and I take just a city from the Midwest. In Cincinnati, 200 children will be dropped or denied access to Head Start. And Anita Wolf, a mother of 2 special needs children, said she may have to choose which child can remain in Head Start's enrichment program. I say to my friend, we're here because this is hurting people. This isn't about statistics. And I'm just very disappointed that we can't work together and restore this. At least, how long does my friend restore these cuts? The next 5 months?
5 months.
Right? 5 months. And so I just wanted to thank you for yielding for these questions, and I will listen to my colleagues on the other side and respond in due course. Thank you.
President,
Senator from Oklahoma.
the reason that patients can't get chemotherapeutic drugs has nothing to do with the budget. It has everything to do with the administration of CMS and the payment recognitions. I've been working on this issue for 3 months. It has nothing to do with the sequester. It has to do with what the CMS has ruled in terms of payments and appropriate payments. The majority leader is a wonderful man. He has a different view of what it takes to get our country back in shape. He's actually split with the president this afternoon because the president said the only way that he would in fact turn off sequester is with a tax increase. And the only way that this could be considered a tax increase is spending money that we weren't ever going to spend anyway, is acknowledging that we're going to charge it to our children. So in essence, it'll be a tax increase, it's just not on us. It'll be on every child. The same child that he makes a moment of. It doesn't have to be this way. The president could agree for flexibility. His secretaries could ask for reprogramming authority. But they've not done that. And why have they not done that? Because in the president's own words, he wants sequester to hurt. What a position for the CEO of this country, for the leader of this country, to say, I'm going to teach you a lesson. I'm not going to use judgment and priority and categorize things that are most important and fund things that are least important. I'm going to reject all attempts at flexibility. And I want to make one other point. The president keeps saying they've saved $2.5 trillion. The majority leader just said the same thing. What the American people ought to know is 1.2 trillion of that, quote, savings is increases that were planned that aren't going to happen. Let me say that again. $1.2 trillion of the, quote, savings were spending increases that were planned that aren't going to happen. Well, everybody that runs a family budget or runs a business knows that's no savings. You didn't save any money that you were going to spend and then didn't spend. It wasn't saved because you never spent it. But it's the wonderful way Washington accounts that's different than the way all the rest of us have to live our lives. So let's go back and review. We as Republicans agree we ought to fund the most important things of our government. And we believe there ought to be priorities to that. But we also believe we ought to save a future for our children. And the answer that we found ourselves in, sequestration, the answer to that problem is to give the administration the flexibility of making priority choices, just like the rest of us do. And if they don't want to use it, then they won't use it. But the fact is we won't pass that. The same tools that we'd all use ourselves, we won't pass that. Now, why is it we won't pass that? To order things in priority, to do what's most important first. I would tell you the conferences that the FAA spends and the amount of travel that the people within the FAA spend are a low priority compared to keeping controllers working. We haven't seen any cut in those programs. None. Matter of fact, the president's budget recommended taking $800 million out of the airport improvement program, if you will read his budget. That was the president's recommendation. So now we're really at odds with the president because he says we can save that $800 million. It's flabbergasting to think that there's absolutely no common sense in Washington and that we won't do the things that are in the best long-term interest for the people of this country. And so what we do is we create a situation that's going to tremendously impact our nation, both the business and the common citizen who's traveling. And we do it for political gain to prove a point, not because we have to, because we're going to make sequester hurt. We can have the security that American people are wanting is to know the future's okay. The future isn't okay with us operating the way we're operating. And I know government isn't easy, and I know it's messy, but there are some absolute truths. And the absolute truth is you can't spend your way out of debt, and you can't borrow your way out of debt. And we're taking $88 billion over the next year out of the budget, out of a $3.7 trillion budget. If we're not capable of doing that, none of us should be here. Either party. What we fail to recognize is what the real risk is for our country. And the risk is we're running out of time and the ability to continue to borrow in the world. And the only reason we look good today is because everybody else looks worse. We're the only rose in the bud vase that's not wilted right now. And that's going to change. And when it does, the consequences for our kids, for our families, for our economy, for our GDP is going to totally change. Because if we went back to historical interest rates today, when we quit printing money, which we will eventually have to, it will add another $650 billion a year to our expenses. It does nothing for anybody. So this small 4.5% that the administration refuses to even work on to make it less painful to the American public shows what kind of trouble we're in. Madam President, I'm disappointed, as is, I know, the majority leader, that we can't work out a way to solve this. But they're two totally competing philosophies. One ensures a productive, successful America. The other shows an America drowning in debt. And there has to be a point in time when we say, can't we run this government more efficiently, more effectively, and do it in a way.
Mr. Leader. There are a number of people on the floor that have been here some time, and I thought I would try to